Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Ogti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
In this episode, Aaron and Trishul reflect on past New Year's Eve celebrations, from staying up till midnight as a child to partying as an adult. But now that they have young kids, New Year's Eve is much tamer. Living on the West Coast, Aaron appreciates celebrating at midnight Eastern Time so he can get to bed at a reasonable hour. Given COVID-19 concerns, this year most households will likely party the same way as parents with young kids do, by staying at home. Even so, there is one thing that we can all get excited about. It is that 2020 is officially over. And now, on to our conversation.
Hi, my name is Aaron Ogti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hey, Aaron, great to be here today, and thanks everybody for listening.
Great to be here as well. With New Year's Eve coming up, Trishul and I wanted to kind of keep this conversation quick and light and just think about some of the past New Year's Eve celebrations that we've had and just kind of how different stages of life inform that. And so with that in mind, kind of thinking about celebrating New Year's Eve specifically, that staying up till midnight, watching the ball drop, or whatever else you may do to celebrate. What are some of the things that you've done in the past? And as you think about, Trisha, your past New Year's Eve celebrations, what have some of those big themes been?
I think just like our episode last week where we talked about the evolution of, Christmas in the eyes of somebody who's a young kid to getting older to being an adult, I see a similar path or evolution of New Year's in the eyes of myself as I've gone from a little kid to an adult. I definitely think there's some interesting parallels there.
That's a good point. I had written down a note as I think about it, like New Year's Eve before kids versus after kids, just from my own adult perspective. But I think you're right. I think thinking back all the way back to childhood, there was that celebration aspect of, I know for me that was the only time we were allowed to stay up till midnight. And there's something special about just that. That's the one day per year you're allowed to stay up till midnight. That is an interesting childhood memory of mine now that you bring that up.
Yeah, I do recall that. So there were, I guess actually where it probably started was it was a time where the parents went out late, so we actually had a babysitter on a rare occasion that kind of stayed there until after we went to sleep. That wasn't a real common occurrence when I was growing up, but that was the one time. And then this might be coupled with the notion that a few of our neighborhood kids, family friends, the kids would gather up and the parents might go out, and there might be, like one parent who drew the short straw taking care of the rest of the kids. I do recall that. But then, yeah, they did become an age where the kids actually got to stay up and, kind of join in some of the festivities as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like the age that I might have stayed up the first time, because I remember enjoying that and liking it, but I guess I had to be old enough that I can remember it still. And now my kids are 9, 7, and 4, and I think is either last year or the year before was the first time we let them stay up. And kind of only one of the kids really made it. The youngest one just we didn't even try. We let him stay up a little later, but he ended up going to sleep and put him in his bed. The 7-year-old, she would have been 6 or 5. We might have been watching a movie. She probably fell asleep on the couch, I'm pretty sure. But the oldest, I think, would have made it. So I'm guessing I would have been similar age, where probably in that 8 or 9 or 10 range was the first time I could really think of staying up until midnight. I don't think my parents ever did the like babysitter and going out. I think they were usually at home with us. But there's just that feeling. And I remember like when it got to teenage years, there's a few things that's kind of stood out, but I had a little more influence on the decisions of what we did. So I remember one time in high school, I was paying a lot of attention to a certain radio station choosing their best songs of the year. And like I wanted to make sure to listen to all of those songs as they got close to midnight. So I was playing them either just for myself or on a radio for the whole family. But listening to that radio station, like their song countdown till midnight, was something that happened probably high schoolish, but definitely wasn't going out with anyone at least until college. And yeah, I think even in high school, I was still staying at home with my parents, but we were staying up until midnight. So also, I think once I was in high school, it was the norm for me to stay up past midnight, anyways. So there was no appeal to that part.
Yeah, I do remember the radio station notion where, they would play the top songs of the year. And, at the time, I actually remember I probably used to know all of those songs at that point. But I imagine if I listened to one of those things this year or near history, I probably wouldn't recognize most of them.
That's a good point. Even if I was trying to do that, I wouldn't enjoy it.
Yeah. I don't know if what does that mean? Oh boy. Is that the definition of old?
Not knowing songs when they come on the radio.
Yeah.
It's like how long until all the 90s songs that I think of as in my formative years becomes the classic station.
Right. You probably heard this, when you were a kid 30 years ago was the Beatles. And if you think now, that's 30 years ago was the 90s.
Yeah. And I just, do kids even listen to the radio anymore? I genuinely don't know.
Whoops. Right. I guess we're both dating ourselves quite a bit.
It's probably a Spotify best songs of the year playlist or something like that.
Yeah, you can probably tell your Pandora or your Google to just tell you what they are.
Oh man, so yeah, that started to make me feel old really fast.
Yeah. Oh boy, who was it? It was Casey Kasem. Was he on the West Coast for you guys?
Yeah, and he was Ryan Seacrest took over for him. I think he was always every like Sunday. I think.
Okay.
Was that when he did the top songs of the week?
I think so, but I think he also did the countdown songs, if I recall.
Okay, no, for me, I was in San Diego. I was listening to a local, like, rock / punk rock / alternative radio station that was 91X was the radio station in San Diego when I was growing up that I really liked.
All right, yeah.
So it wasn't anything national, but yeah, it was those were the songs that I really enjoyed and looking forward to listening towards the end of the year. For some fun things, kind of after college, or at least when you're out of your parents' house and before kids, what were some of the fun New Year's Eve celebrations you've done in the past?
Well, it's hard to say it was entirely memorable, but I do remember we did go to New York one year. So, some friends and I to see the ball drop. We did attempt that. I think maybe I had graduated from undergrad at that point, or I was still, just, in my early 20s, something like that.
Were you in Times Square?
Yeah, we, probably got to the point where we were shoved in the middle of a crowd of, 50 feet deep on all around, and probably not looking at anything but a brick wall and a few skyscrapers. But, that's something I checked off, I guess, on a bucket list of sorts.
Would you do it again?
No. I think the hardest part, in that PC, the post-children mindset we're in right now, just staying up to midnight is kind of challenging in itself.
That is one of the things I truly appreciate about being on the West Coast and being Pacific time. The first is NFL games usually start at approximately 1 p.m. local time. So all of the East Coast NFL games start at 10 a.m. out on the West Coast, which is awesome. You kind of wake up, get brunch, and you're ready to watch football for the morning. The other big one is there have been multiple times in my life that I'll watch the ball drop at 9 p.m. Pacific time, and because it's at midnight Eastern, and then I'll go to bed. It's usually happening post kids, but even before we had kids, there was one time we did a ski trip up to Tahoe. We were staying in a big house with I think 5 or 6 other couples. And so we had been skiing and snowboarding all day. I think I was still snowboarding at that point in my life because I didn't start skiing until my oldest was 4 or 5. So I was snowboarding and just you're exhausting. We were planning on snowboarding again the next day and just sitting around, especially in those years we kind of come back to the house and we've been drinking most of the evening and we're just so exhausted that it came to 9 p.m. We watched the ball drop on TV, and pretty much everyone in the house went to sleep so that we could go snowboarding again the next day. So that was the first time I really remember like celebrating the New Year's Eve at midnight Eastern time, even though I'm on the West Coast. But that was like, there have been multiple times in my life I've really appreciated that. So
Yeah.
I almost like, it's not quite pity, but feel bad that you don't get to take advantage of that.
Yeah, it was probably like that last year where, wait, do we call it last year or do we call it this year?
New Year's Eve was last year.
Okay, yeah, technically, yes. For New Year's Eve last year, 2019, December 31st, I'd say we were probably struggling to stay up till midnight. But at the same time, we were probably thankful that my daughter was asleep and we just had some time to spend as adults without a kid. I think what we kind of realized, with the 2-year-old is that it's always best to get the 2-year-old to stick to a consistent routine when it comes to sleep. And if we tried to, maybe keep her up even later for a couple of hours, that would probably mess up her whole cycle for the next week. So that's something we learned early on, that it's far better to forego something like that and be able to keep our sanity for the next week than try to rock the boat with having her my daughter stay up that late.
Yeah, I don't think she would remember it anyways. I think that, and we've had some of those observations, like when they get to 6, 7, 8 ish at the earliest, 6 would be the earliest, 8 they'll probably handle it, then staying up till midnight might be okay when they actually like they can remember it as well. Other than going to New York to see the ball drop, any other pre-kids New Year's Eve celebrations that stand out in your mind?
Yeah, I do recall, there certainly have been those times for going to an actual party in, for example, the New York City, where you have these venues and they throw a big event and whatnot. So that there have been some of that. I recall there has been some time where I haven't been, at home. I've been traveling or been on vacation. So I think we did Sydney one year and India or Mumbai, India another year. So that this was a time where you get to kind of experience it from a different culture, a different country. And that's been definitely an experience on its own.
That does sound pretty cool. I'm curious, like what were like those all sound better than any of my celebrations. What were those like? What were some of the kind of specific things you remember at in Sydney or Mumbai?
Well, so the Sydney one, I believe we were okay. So now I haven't thought about this in 2 decades. This was it was the 2020 or the year 2000, if I
Okay.
recall. Oh boy. Okay, it wasn't Sydney, it was Perth. It was which is a smaller, much smaller city, probably a day's drive away from Sydney. And it's on the coast, so yeah, were on one of those cruise things, right? They have a boat that goes out and you get to see some fireworks and whatnot. So
Okay.
yeah, and it's one of those things where, so thinking back 20, I probably wasn't the drinking age in the US, but here we are, in Australia where it's a lot more liberal, so I'm sure that made a difference in my mind. And then yeah, the time in India was also memorable, just because India does take their celebrations very seriously, especially when it comes to like fireworks and things like that. So the whole town becomes alive with fireworks and celebrations and parties on the street. But literally, there's just masses of people all around celebrating. The bigger holiday is Diwali, which was this year, not too long, back in November.
Mm-hmm.
And there, it's probably the next bigger holiday than New Year's. And at that point, there's just so much celebration and fireworks on. There's just this haze of the smoky feel you get from fireworks.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's in the air from all directions, just because the whole town is alive with the crackling and whatnot.
That yeah, I've learned a little bit about Diwali from my children's preschool. The daycare also has a few Indian families, so the daycare teachers learned and try to teach Diwali. So my children have brought home different projects and tried to teach me a little bit about it. But yeah, I think that was not that long ago. Back mid-November or so.
Yep. Yeah.
I had not considered the idea that was a bigger celebration, especially sometimes for the fireworks, than like a New Year's Eve. Because like in the U.S., Christmas is probably considered the bigger holiday, but it's much more family oriented. It's kind of very celebrated inside, and there's definitely not fireworks associated with it. But for New Year's Eve, it's more of a going out type of holiday and much more outwardly celebratory, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think with Indian holidays, there are plenty of other more family associated holidays, but with Diwali, it definitely is up there in terms of the celebratory aspect. And then you can imagine a culture or basically a situation where fireworks are highly less regulated and pretty much found all over the place, where it's quite encouraged to have that it happening all over the place, including the streets, and a lot of fanfare kind of nonstop.
Yeah. I remember for me, kind of the closest to that kind of celebration would just be going into San Francisco. I live on the peninsula, and even when I lived in San Diego as an adult, we'd go to friends' houses a lot and celebrate New Year's Eve with friends. But one year we went to a bigger kind of apartment party in San Francisco. There's probably 30 or 40 people there, and you could see most of downtown San Francisco. And you could see fireworks from the windows, and that was I want to say How I Met Your Mother was on, because the instructions were to suit up for the guys. So a lot of the guys were wearing suits and kind of felt like the closest thing to like one of those adult parties that you imagined as a young adult. That was a lot of fun, but most years it's just kind of hanging out with some friends up until we had kids. Once we had kids, then it's been staying at home the vast majority of the time. I don't think we've gone out since my oldest was born, so I haven't been out anywhere on New Year's Eve for 9 years. I don't even know what I would do if like even like separate from COVID. Like if it was just a normal year, if say my kids were old enough for out of the house, or they, I don't even know what my wife and I would want to do. It still feels like we want to stay in and go to sleep early.
Yeah, I imagine we're probably on that same wavelength at this point.
There's a kind of a like an inside family joke that my in-laws, because they're in their 60s but they have no kids in the house, they do a better job celebrating New Year's Eve than we do. So I maybe that's just we're tired from kids and so we want the regular sleep, but maybe once kids are out of the house, then we can plan around that a little more effectively.
That probably does make sense. At this point, I'm sure my parents have a much more active social life than I do. So here we are.
Kind of, I guess it's hard to say. Like, I was gonna ask do you have like suggestions or guidance in time of COVID to celebrate? But I'm guessing you and I are doing the same thing again this year of staying in, putting kids to bed at an appropriate hour for their age, and then going to sleep pretty quickly.
That'll kind of be it. Yeah, I'd say, the general tips are if you are going out, obviously you want to make sure you stay safe. And the big one around this time of the year, of course, is having a designated driver. And what was good, up until this year, I don't know if this is leveraged so much, but I think a great change for this generation, as opposed to what we kind of had to think about with when I was in my 20s, is now that there's Uber, you kind of have a lot less worry of having to think about having a vehicle on the road.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the biggest safety thing that I could think of if you're going to be out and about. The other thing to think about as well is, just statistically, New Year's is actually a big day for car thefts in general. So it's just another good reason to keep the car at home and just think of a better way for transportation. But obviously this year that may be even less of a concern for most people.
Wait, New Year's Eve is a high car theft time?
Yeah, it's one of those periods where the thieves kind of know that guards are going to be down, or individuals' guards are going to be down. So it does turn out to be a day where there is actually, according to the National Insurance Crime Bureau, a lot of thefts for cars. Yeah.
Really?
It's the top holiday, yeah, for car thefts.
I'm I don't want to say flabbergasted, but like I had no idea. Do you know of any reason why? Is it just these like more cars out and fewer people paying attention?
I think that's probably it. This is the one, in quotes, drinking holiday, right? The one holiday where you kind of know everybody's going to be, not quite paying attention or in their normal mindset.
So even if they were being safe, they might drive somewhere, but they can get a ride home with plan of getting the car later. So maybe the car's not at a normal spot, or
yeah, exactly. Like people leave their cars or don't forget to lock it, and yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, I can see yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Well, that's interesting. I learned something new today.
Yeah, well, the bigger thing is if you're going to stay at home, there are still the sensible things to do. Like obviously, if you're going to be drinking, plan to eat plenty of food, not have an empty stomach. It also helps to have just activities to pass the time. I'm not saying drinking games, but I'm saying activities that can slow your consumption.
Yeah,
that might help.
I know we'll probably end up watching a movie, especially because just the age of our kids, that'll help them get to midnight. I know if we've played board games in the past, but I don't know if they could handle it going that late. They also get to kind of sit on the couch, so if they happen to fall asleep, they're in a comfortable spot. I'm trying to think of even if the kids were older. Yeah, I think just that we'll be staying at home. I was thinking. I remember reading a Freakonomics, might have been a Freakonomics blog post that was trying to do analysis of drunk driving versus drunk walking, and I think their conclusion was that on a per mile basis, drunk walking was actually more likely to be dangerous to yourself. So that kind of there's an economic kind of consideration that if you were trying to be uh, the Homo economicus, that they can see why some people would drive home versus walk home drunk. But I don't know that I was able to capture the externalities of you might injure someone else versus if you are drunk walking, you're only likely injuring yourself. But their final conclusion was get a taxi or in this case get an Uber or Lyft. Like that did seem to be a pretty universal solution of that solves all the problems of transportation or getting home after drinking.
Yeah, and I don't know if, well, I do recall like a year where Uber was subsidizing the rides for these types of situations as well.
That makes sense.
Yeah, again, just completely different year. It's far likely that individuals will be keeping things at home. For the same reason where I recall there was a situation where trying to social distance and meet up with people and then thinking, okay, what if we go out to a bar or something where they have outdoor drinks and whatnot. But even in that situation, New Year's, it's so cold. It doesn't seem like there's a good solution for that besides being at home. But one thing I just might throw out there is also this notion of having a liquor liability if you're the host and you have a guest that ends up getting a little too intoxicated and then driving home and getting into an accident.
Oh, the if you're the host of the party, you can be considered liable for that.
That's right. Yeah. So that's something to think about as well.
That is a good point, and I actually do. I remember having a conversation with a client about just should they get an umbrella policy and how do we think in terms of liability, both kind of homeowners the liability part of homeowners insurance, then auto insurance, and then should they kind of do an umbrella policy on top of that?
Yeah, that's certainly a good stacking. If you have a good amount of net worth, you want to make sure that the combination of those policies can cover you for that.
Yeah. That is a good point. I don't know if I want to bring that up to the client because I don't think that's a concern of theirs, but that would be another thing to consider when it comes to make sure you have appropriate liability insurance.
Yeah, just something to kind of keep in place if you have a good amount of net worth. And having that umbrella policy isn't a bad idea just because it doesn't tend to be too expensive anyway. It's on top of your other policies.
Yeah. That fits in your back to our insurance conversation of cost is very low because the probability of it happening very low. But if it does, the cost can be catastrophic. So that's the kind of risk that it makes sense to outsource.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So let's say it's a few years in the future and your kids are either kind of old enough to take care of themselves or they're out of the house. Is there any other kind of New Year's Eve celebration you'd like to do in the future?
Yeah, this is post-vaccine as well, or
Yeah,
post-COVID. So, I'm frankly looking forward to being able to gather with closer friends and family and probably have a situation where, you don't have to worry about getting the kids to bed and you can kind of enjoy yourself. I think In a normal year, I would probably just say let's just go to sleep early. But I feel like, maybe some sort of social gathering is kind of overdue.
So it sounds like it's not even kids related per se. It's just the kind of COVID fatigue of I'd like to see my friends and have a gathering and haven't been able to do that for so long. And that's the thing I miss.
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know how things are out there, but currently in Pennsylvania, it's in kind of lockdown mode, meaning you can't really leave the state, or if you do come back from leaving the state, you have to quarantine and have a test and all that. So I think, top of mind is probably reminiscing and dreaming about having a simpler world where you can do those things.
For California, it's mostly county by county, where they keep track of cases as they're going up or down, going down on a county by county basis, and a lot of the policies are kind of dependent on that data. So some counties are currently subject to more restrictive COVID related rules, and others are a little more open. But I mean, the yeah, so it's kind of like it just depends on how well that county is doing with just wearing masks and social distancing, and are they able to be safe enough that they're kind of it's both county by county, but it's also kind of activity by activity. So like golf is still okay because it's outside and naturally social distance, but one of the first things that does kind of close down or open up is dining at restaurants, just outdoors. Like that will be kind of the first thing to close down if cases get too high in any individual county. And it's also like that's I don't want to say it's the middle of that spectrum, but it's kind of one of the things that is controllable that they can take action on. So like right now there's a curfew that we can't be out past 10 p.m. So for context, we're recording this a few weeks in advance. So I don't know what the actual rules will be on New Year's Eve, but my guess is going to be something like that. It would not surprise me if California says no New Year's Eve celebrations, and so you have to, because you don't want to be out late and not gathering. So there's jokes about how does a curfew affect, like what does the 10 p.m. have to do with COVID? And I think it's just the limiting the social gatherings, especially if there's drinking related and kind of inhibitions are lowered. And those are the kind of things that happen after 10 p.m. So I think everyone's going to celebrate New Year's Eve the same way we are this year.
Yeah, that's probably fair, and perhaps everybody's also looking forward to putting the year behind us.
That's a good point. I think everyone's really looking forward to 2021.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that you enjoy kind of putting your daughter to sleep and a nice relaxing evening. Maybe you'll make it to midnight, maybe not. I think this year we probably will make it to midnight, but we'll be sitting down watching movies for most of it, I guess. So anything else you want to add as you think about New Year's Eve, either past, present, or future? The ghosts of New Year's Eve?
Well, I like the fact that there is something to look forward to in some future New Year's Eve. And frankly, I'm not too disappointed that this year is going to be a little on the softer to side in terms of celebrations. It might not have been too different having a 3-year-old versus any other year where COVID would not be an issue.
Yeah. Well, this was a nice. I thought the conversation would be lighter, but we got a little darker in certain places.
Perhaps, but on to bigger and better things for 2021.
That I like that. Let's 2020 is done. Let's move on to 2021. That's a great sentiment to end on.
Right on. Well, good stuff, Aaron.
Thank you very much for the conversation, Trishul. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron. I enjoyed it as well. And thanks, everybody, for listening. If you're enjoying these episodes, do subscribe to our podcast, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.